Hello and welcome. Hi. Welcome to this intimate lunch conversation honoring President Oliver. This luncheon is brought to you by the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work, where we convene these kinds of conversations at the nexus of faith and work. We like to ask the question, how do leaders bring their faith into their leadership experiences? Mine is just to welcome you and thank you for coming today to this first ever Lorentzsen event in your wonderful, beautiful city. And what a nice room, nice view. I serve as the director of the Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work, and my name is Faith. Allow me to introduce my boss lady, my wonderful Dean Brewer, who will bring a greeting from the Offit School and introduce our invocator.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. It's sort of our first foray into Augustana territory, but we are very glad to have all of you with us and for the very kind reception that we are getting here. I am exceedingly pleased to be able to introduce David Horozdowski, who will be delivering the invocation this morning. David is President and Chief Executive Officer for the Evangelical Lutheran Good Samaritan Society, the nation's largest not-for-profit, faith-based provider of long-term care, senior housing, and home care services. Before assuming his current position in 2003, David served the Society in a variety of roles where he provided leadership and management to the Sioux Falls-based organization. He has more than 38 years of experience with the Good Samaritan Society. As the Society's chief executive, David oversees more than 21,000 employees at 240 Good Samaritan Society locations in 24 states. He's an effective communicator of mission, values, and vision with expertise in strategic thinking and implementation. His experience in healthcare is extensive, and he has in-depth understanding of the needs of the elderly. Prior to becoming President and Chief Executive Officer, David served as Vice President for Advancement, Support, and Planning from 1994 to 97, Vice President for Operations from 97 to 2002, and Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer from 2002 to 2003. He was a member of the Society's Board of Directors from 1985 to 1989 and from 2003 to present. In addition to his work with the Society, David has and continues to be involved in public policy advocacy for seniors across the country. I'm delighted to introduce David Horozdowski.
My goodness, that introduction was longer than my last name. So I'll have to have my assistant to remember to bring the short version instead of the long version. Thank you for bearing listening through that. I only thought it was fitting, Rob, that I quote from, given our Lutheran heritage here in the room, that I quote from a good Catholic, St. Francis of Assisi, and he said, "First do what is necessary, then do what is possible, and the next thing you'll know, you'll be doing the impossible." And Rob, as I think about and having watched you over these many years and known you over these many years, you have not only been doing what's necessary when you first came into this role, and then captured the possibilities that Augustana could be about here in this community and, quite frankly, serving the world, and then moved to what others thought might be impossible, but your leadership brought to all three levels your great gifts that God has given you. So it's been a pleasure to watch you and continue to be your friend. Please join me as we pray now together. For this very day, Lord, and all that is provided before us, we give you thanks. For our very lives and our comings and goings, we give you thanks. For our friend, Rob Oliver, and all the faith institutions, such as Augustana and Concordia, we give you thanks. We ask that you bless our gathering and that you bless Rob, Angie, and their family in this next chapter of life. We praise you in all things, great and small, knowing you are the creator of all. We delight in the love you have for us, which gives us true peace. We claim your presence in our lives now and forever. Amen.
Please feel free to continue eating, but we're going to get moving along with the program here. My name's Larry Pappenfuss, and I work in the Concordia College Office of Advancement, and I also direct the Dovery Center for Faith and Learning in my 24th year at the college, and so it's a pleasure for me to look out in the audience here and see some former students and some people that I've gotten to know over the course of the years, so thank you so much for being here. My connection to Augie, I have several of them actually. I married a full-blooded Haugian Lutheran Norwegian girl whose aunts and uncles went to Canton back in the day, and so I know of Augie through that. And then for a period of years I served as athletic director at Concordia, and Augustana was gracious enough to have us down and give us a tour, and we were looking at upgrading athletic facilities, and you guys had done a wonderful job of that already, and very appreciative of that. And my son, who although he didn't ultimately decide to come here, this was on his end list of possibilities for him to come to Augustana. And we've always, over the years, enjoyed a good bit of cross-pollination. I reached out to Paul Nessheim to come here. Paul has been a good friend, and unfortunately he couldn't make it today. And of course, I look over at Jackie Payne, who's our secret spy in the advancement office at Augustana there too, over there. So it reminds me of that line from Isaiah that says, you know, look to the rock from which you were cut, the quarry from which you were hewn. And I think that both of our institutions were cut and hewn from that same quarry. And so I'm excited about the opportunity today to think about the two schools that share a good bit in common. You know, I think of our mission, our religious missions, and our character of the two institutions, in my mind, are very similar. We both have academic programs that combine both the liberal arts with career development. And our constituencies are very similar with, you know, in the case of Augie, it's South Dakota and in southwestern Minnesota, and for Concordia, it's North Dakota, Montana, and northern Minnesota. And in practical terms, you know, we don't have that much overlap in enrollment, save for the student who wants to come here and play Division II athletics, perhaps, and then the occasional Fargo-Moorhead or Sioux Falls students who just want to get out of town to attend a college. So we recognize that we're in Augie country, but as you may have noticed from the list of the participants that you saw here, there's also a few Cobbers in our audience, and it's really a group of Cobbers who suggested that we host this event to honor President Oliver, whose achievements of president are, of course, exemplary. We look forward to that. And so our program will be to hear from President Oliver and his remarks, and then a short response from President Kraft, followed by some questions from the audience, which I will help moderate. So you might be percolating some of those questions you may have now as you look forward to that portion. Now it's my pleasure. Oh, I should say one other thing. I'm pinch hitting for President Dovery, who was hoping to be here. President Dovery unfortunately developed an eye infection and had to be at a doctor appointment today. So he wanted to make sure that I send his regards and his apologies for not being able to be with us today. But now it's my pleasure to introduce President Bill Kraft. Dr. Kraft is completing his 6th year as Concordia president, so he can no longer claim any rookie status that he once did. It's a pleasure to have him as our leader. I get the good pleasure of spending a fair amount of windshield time with Dr. Kraft, and I always look forward to our conversations together. You know, another thing that our schools have in common is that Bill and Ann are leaving tomorrow for Norway, where they'll be joining, I think, Rob and Angie, right, for celebrating the King Harold's 80th birthday, I believe it will be. And so I'm sure they're looking forward to that, and the timing of this just happened to work out so that we could squeeze it into that busy itinerary. So with those words, I will welcome President Kraft, who will introduce President Oliver. President Bill Kraft.
Larry, thank you very much, and please remind me that I need to stop at Target and pick up a gift for King Harold before I go on the plane tomorrow. What a pleasure it is for all of us from Concordia to join you here in Sioux Falls today. I'm so thankful to Faith and to Dean Duran for scheduling this, the first of what I hope is many occasions in which we can be with you all here in Sioux Falls. It's a pleasure to me to be on the program as well with David Hordofsky, who is, among many other things, an Alumni Achievement Award winner from Concordia College. And here, far from home, I can say, gave the best response, gave the best reception speech I have ever heard for an Alumni Achievement Award. And if you know David, you would not be surprised at his eloquence. I hear a lot of speeches, and this was a wonderful one. So it's a pleasure to be here with David and to be with Regent Emeritus John Quello of the wonderful and humble class of 1966 of Concordia College. Don't ask him about the number 66, or we'll be here for a while today, but we're glad to be here. And also at my table, Concordia graduate Paul Hansen of Sanford here in Sioux Falls. Well, this is an audience for whom President Rob Oliver needs little introduction. Like me, like all of the presidents of the ELCA colleges in the United States, you know him and you admire his work. But I'm honored to speak about him just briefly here at this gathering hosted by Concordia College's Lorentzsen Center for Faith and Work. When I think about Rob's leadership, I think about invitation, innovation, and integrity. Invitation to students, undergraduate and graduate, students from around the block in Sioux Falls and students from around the world to join the Augie community of faith and learning, to bring their gifts to the place for possibilities that he has nurtured here with alumni, faculty, staff, and the governing board at Augie. Innovation at a remarkable pace during his 25 years of service to Augustana, culminating in his 11 years as its president. And I'll name just a few things: renovation and new construction of library, science, and athletic facilities, the growth of graduate programs at Augie, and of online opportunities for its undergraduates, the Civitas Honors Program, and the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and the full scope of the Horizon Strategic Plan leading to the change from Augustana College to Augustana University, and the partnerships that Rob has fostered with all of you and in this audience know far better than I, partnerships with businesses, with nonprofits, with healthcare centers, arts agencies, schools, churches, and others in Sioux Falls and throughout the region. So, invitation, innovation, and integrity. Some things need to change. Some things need to change at this threshold moment in higher education in the United States, and some things must abide. As I think of Rob, I think of his devotion to what he once called the lifelong club of eternal curiosity, to the experience of learning that he has championed throughout his career, both before and during his time as president at Augustana. And I think of his consistent and persistent return to the core values of faith, liberal arts, excellence, community, and service that define Augustana University. Every ELCA president will miss Rob and Angie Oliver, but we are excited about the next chapter of your lives. We look forward to welcoming new president, Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin, and we wish Rob and Angie Godspeed. Would you please join me in applauding our speaker today, President Rob Oliver.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, that's very kind. One of the best parts about retiring is people say such nice things about you. it's really, I mean, why did I wait so long, right? Of course, then once we're gone, then they're free to talk about all the things that they didn't like. So, we'll wait for that to come too. Anyway, first let me just welcome you all and thank you for being here today. I know Senator Mike Rounds is downstairs, so you chose this, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you for your presence here, and thanks so much to our friends at Concordia for this invitation to come together. We celebrate our alumni here in Sioux Falls, and what a good idea that we should do this. And the same thing in Fargo. When we go up there, we have good Augie friends up there, and so it's good to have to be with our Cobber friends here. I hope you all noticed that normally I am dressed in navy and gold, right? But today, I broke out some red, so I hope that was the right thing to do. So. Again, along the lines of people saying nice things, this has been the year of the long goodbye for my wife and I worry that all these people that have continued to be good audience members and have listened to me so much, I might be wearing out my welcome with them. They've certainly heard a lot from me lately, so. I do think it's appropriate and worthy for us to spend time together as institutions and to celebrate our common mission because we both are at work to prepare young people for lives of service. And I think, what we are each doing is pertinent to the mission of the Lorentzsen Center and to deal with discussions that are at that nexus of faith and work. Because we are both stewarding and building communities of faith as we equip young people to go out into work and service to their communities and ultimately to make a real difference in the world. So my guess is that if one visits either one of our campuses, one will hear a message that's similar to the one I share with prospective students and their parents when they visit Augustana. I tell them that if you come to Augustana, you will learn a lot about yourself. You will learn about your unique giftedness and where your passion for learning is within you. It is our goal that you will discover the source of energy for a lifetime of continued learning such that that fire within you will never diminish. Indeed, we hope that we kindle a fire for learning that is unquenchable. So yes, you will come to learn a lot about yourself, but I then tell them, it's not at all about you. We intend that you will also learn how to listen for the call of the neighbor, because the key to a life that is meaningful is understanding the needs of others, and then coupling your unique giftedness and your passion with that need. Then you will have a meaningful and fulfilling lifetime of service. So I would wager that the words might be slightly different at each of our 26 sister institutions, but the message is similar to the Augustana motto: enter to learn, leave to serve. Some years ago, I team taught a course with one of our great professors from our religion department. Dr. Richard Swanson first conceived of the course and then asked if I would join him in creating it. And the course was a senior capstone course entitled Just Work, which was borrowed from the book of the same name authored by Russell Muirhead, who is a professor of government at Harvard University. So enunciation really matters when you think about this title. Is it just work, or is it just work? In this course, we sought to have our students think deeply about how they intend to spend their work lives. Muirhead's essay on the justice of work focuses on the fit between the person and their career. Our notions of freedom and fairness are incomplete, he argues, without due consideration of how we fit the work we do. I will admit that Muirhead's work is a difficult read. He gives us much to chew on as we consider issues of justice in the work that we do, individually and collectively. He asks us to consider our work in new ways that are important and thought-provoking. We also used Poe Bronson's book, What should I do with my life? Bronson shares the stories of numerous individuals he interviewed who were all looking for the answer to that seemingly simple question. What should I do with my life? I found that the key thread running through all the personal vignettes is that one has dissonance between the individual personal values and that the work that they do every day. The result is stress and is dissatisfaction. Most often it leads ultimately to a decision to make a career change. This may have happened to you, or may yet happen. It most certainly happened for me, and I will spend the next few minutes getting personal with you as I share parts of my story. I hope to share with you that my personal belief and value systems, my faith, plays a big part in it. Dayton, Ohio is the home of the famous Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville. If you haven't already read it, I commend to you the book by David McCullough that tells their story. Chapter 1 opens with a quote from Wilbur Wright. "If I were giving a young man advice as to how he might succeed in life," Wilbur says, "I would say to him, pick out a good father and mother and begin life in Ohio." Well, I was born in Dayton, Ohio, not far from where the Wright's bicycle shop once was. So I did indeed begin my life in Ohio. And I was also very fortunate as I chose a great father and mother. The Wright brothers' father was a bishop in their church, and it's clear that he had a huge impact on the two brothers in both their faith lives and in their insatiable desire to read and to learn. My father was also a man of faith. He was an engineer who, like the Wright brothers, worked on flying machines. Dad was a West Point graduate and then was a pilot for the Army Air Corps in World War II. In 1947, the Air Corps became the newest branch of the armed services, and as we now know as the U.S. Air Force. So the Air Force sent my dad to MIT, where he earned his PhD in electrical engineering and embarked on a career as a test pilot, a professor at the Air Force Academy, and a rocket scientist. So in our house, it really was rocket science. The flying machines he worked on were rockets, and he and his colleagues designed guidance systems so that those rockets would go where they were intended. He even had a hand in the Saturn Moon project. My dad became a role model for me and my siblings. He was a role model in his devotion to his work. He was also a role model as he faithfully took us to church every Sunday and led us in prayer at the beginning of every meal. I can tell you that there was never a specific moment of conversion for me when I discovered Christ as my Savior. Thanks to my dad, I always understood that God was part of my life and that worship was a constant and important part of life, even a life full of seemingly relentless change and occasional disruptive hardships. Being an Air Force brat, we moved often, and change was perpetual in every way. And then when I was 9, our mom left us. It was an incredibly confusing time for us all, but Dad was steady and persevered as he provided for us while working through his own pain. After my parents' divorce, we moved 3 times in the next 4 years. Things were far from perfect, but there was always a constant. Wherever we lived, Dad always found a church home, and we were there. If you ask where the seeds of my faith were first sown and by whom, I very clearly know the answer. It was the Holy Spirit working through my father. The hymn writer Frederick Faber says it with these words: "Faith of our fathers living still, in spite of dungeon, fire, and sword. Oh, how our hearts, Oh, how our hearts beat high with joy whenever we hear that glorious word. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will always be true to you till death." Like a lot of young people, there came a time when I exercised my independence from nearly all things having to do with my upbringing. I certainly wasn't going to become an engineer. And as I left home for college, I left a lot of things behind, including attending worship. I was free to make my own decisions and happy to live large in that freedom. I didn't always make wise decisions. One of my favorite stories in Scripture is the story of the prodigal son, perhaps because I see myself so clearly in that story. I also see my dad, arms open, always happy to lovingly welcome me home. He still does that to this day at age 94. My dad laid a foundation of faith for me, and I feel as though I have spent much of my life adding bricks to that foundation. And when I left the church for a time, God was faithful and never stopped looking for me to come back and accept that gift of faith. I was lucky to fall in love with a woman who also came from a family of faith. Before we were married, when I was in graduate school and Angie was finishing her undergraduate degree, we would occasionally attend worship together at Trinity Lutheran Church in Vermilion, pastored by Bruce Williams. Little did I know that Pastor Bruce would come to play a huge role later in my life. Angie and I were married at another Trinity Lutheran Church, this one in Rapid City, and we will celebrate our 40th anniversary this August. Shortly after we were married, we moved to Sioux Falls, where I resumed my career in banking at what was then Northwestern National Bank, where I would continue to work in various capacities for the next 27 years. Now, there are a lot of jokes around about bankers. I'm sure you've all heard them, right? So one of my favorites is the one about a patient who was in desperate need of a heart transplant. At the moment of the procedure, there were two options available. One was the heart of a fit young man in his 20s. The other from a 65-year-old recently retired banker. The patient quickly made his choice. "I'll take the old banker's heart," he said enthusiastically. "It clearly has never been used." Now, as a recovering banker, I beg to differ with that punchline. I truly loved my career in banking and am grateful for all the blessings it provided for me and my family. I worked with customers who came to me with their dreams. As a personal banker, maybe that dream was a new car or a boat or a camper. Many times their dreams was to maybe buy their first home. Somewhat ironically, for a time, I managed the student loan program at our bank and helped young people finance their dreams of going to college. The point is that I was invited into my customers' lives in a very personal and private way. People shared intimate details of their financial and work and family situations that they didn't typically share with others. I quickly discerned that it was an exceptional privilege to be invited into such a close relationship with people. I also learned that there is honor in all work, that there is no list of noble professions, but rather it's the nobility that the worker assigns to that job and how they do that work that matters. I learned a lot about human behaviors and the decisions that individuals and families faced, sometimes happy and exciting, sometimes difficult and tragic. As a commercial banker, I dealt with individuals and their businesses, their professions, or corporate trusts. I helped people finance the acquisition or startup of enterprises, helped them with their growth and expansion, and sometimes contraction. We worked through good times and through challenging economic conditions. I dealt with farm families through the farm crisis of the 80s, when really good people found themselves in difficult and heartbreaking situations. Contrary to the punchline on the banker joke, I found myself using my heart a lot, blending the analytical work of my head with the human reality in my heart to make decisions that ultimately affected people's lives. Bronson writes in his book that we need to use our head as a soldier for our heart, so that we are always using our values to inform our decisions. There were times where my work would keep me up at night, agonizing over the decisions I needed to make. Fortunately, there were many times when the joy of working with people was incredibly rewarding. Perhaps one of the most important lessons I learned was there was always more than meets the eye. One must take care to listen carefully and fully to discover the whole story and never rush to judgment, especially about people. Always listen for and look for the depth of character and the values of the person with whom you are doing business. I learned that lenders also must have faith. Faith that things will work out as intended, and that individuals will be faithful in repaying their debts. I came to be grateful that I was a banker in the Midwest, where prairie values and sensibilities are strong, and where people of faith are plentiful. Fortunately for me, I had caring managers who mentored me along, giving me both direction when I needed it and freedom to learn from experience and my occasional missteps. My mentors were good people who were strong leaders in the community and who I came to know were also faithful members of their church communities. I was fortunate to be asked to take a formal leadership role in the bank as I moved into management positions. This changed my responsibilities in ways that weren't immediately apparent to me. You see, at first, the title and the promotion were kind of heady experiences. And of course, the added compensation was meaningful to our family. But the reality was this: I was no longer only responsible for my own decisions and their impact on my customers and the institution. I was now responsible for the decisions and the outcomes of others, and for their individual professional development. Realizing that my success was dependent on their success, the impact of servant leadership became apparent to me. I love the words of Max Dupree, who is the CEO of Herman Miller and the author of the book, Leadership is an Art. He writes that the first role of the leader is to define reality and to describe what can be. And the last is to say thank you. In between, the leader must become a servant and a debtor. In the words found in Luke's gospel, a leader is one who serves. A servant leader is one who, not one. A servant leader is not one who inflicts pain, but rather one who bears pain for others. Dupree speaks to the importance of an inspiring vision for the future when he talks about defining what can be. A small plaque has been in my office since my days at the bank, which quotes from Proverbs, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." This type of vision has nothing to do with eyesight, but rather with dreams and opportunities. This type of vision actually allows us to see in the dark, including those dark times that we will all surely experience. I was always a student, one who sought to learn more. I was hungry to learn more about my customers and their businesses, and also about the business of banking. I read a lot and sought understanding about complex issues. I came to learn that simple solutions seldom are. In my capacity as a leader, I sought to share as much as I could with those I was responsible for. Understanding that knowledge is power, I felt that teaching my subordinates was the most important thing I could do. I tried to share as much as I could with them and encourage them to also to be hungry to learn and to teach me as well. I taught for the American Institute of Banking and for the Institute of Financial Education. I taught financial management for the MBA program at the University of South Dakota. I found that I loved teaching as much as I did learning, and that they are indeed two sides of the same coin. Our bank department was successful, and it grew in volume, profitability, and influence in the enterprise. I was proud of the work that our group was accomplishing and how much we had learned and grown together. I was also proud of how much we enjoyed our relationships, both professionally and personally. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we had respect and admiration for each other, and an understanding of the humanity of our work together and how it benefited our customers, the institution, and our individual families. Our corporate CEO, Dick Kovacevic, wrote a monograph outlining the vision and values of our organization. And we took great pride in living out those values in our work. I would say at that time, there was great alignment between the individual values and the enterprise values, which allowed us to use both our heads and our hearts as we worked through the complexity of daily decisions that needed to be made. Our values were based on the simple and straightforward premise that our role was to serve and support the individual success of our customers. And if they were successful, we would be also. I was 34 years old when I was asked to become president of the banks in the Sioux Falls market, the largest in the state. These were exciting times at both work and at home. Angie and I had 2 daughters by then, 6-year-old Andrea and our brand new arrival, Laura. It is important to note that no one is successfully on their own. I could not have done what I did were it not for the devotion and support of Angie at home. She devoted herself to being a great parent and a great homemaker, and without her taking care of those responsibilities, I could not have done what I did. A lot of what I did each day, I could not openly share with her. Confidentiality was a key to the trust that we built with customers. Even so, Angie and I were a team at work and at home, even when work meant that I was not home with her. She put up with a lot, often alone, and she deserves a lot of the credit. She also called out the very best in me, balancing my individual drive with the needs of our family and our community. In addition to work and home, Angie and I were active members and supporters of our church. Gloria Dei Lutheran Church was a new mission startup, part of the 50 more in 84 expansion of Lutheran congregations. Who was the mission pastor charged with opening up that new church? It was Reverend Bruce Williams, who was moving his family up from Sioux Falls, up from Vermilion to Sioux Falls. Prior to joining Gloria Dei, Angie and I had been members at Grace Lutheran in Hilltop. We had made the transition from occasional attendees who had made a decision each Saturday night about whether or not we were going to church in the morning. We had made the transition to the point where there was no longer a need for conversation on Saturday nights. We knew we would be in worship the following morning. We were both very active at Grace. And one day our pastor announced that this new congregation was opening up in southeastern Sioux Falls, whose location was very near to the new home we had just built. So when Bruce Williams held the very first organizational meeting for Gloria Dei, Angie attended on our behalf. I was probably working that evening. She was one of only 2 people who showed up and met with Bruce. What faith he must have had to keep going and get this new church successfully started. I remember going from house to house in our neighborhood, distributing flyers about Gloria Dei. At that time, Andrea was only 3 years old, so she rode in the wagon behind me as I walked down the sidewalk. I figured I would have a warmer reception knocking on doors if I had this darling little girl with enormous brown eyes with me, and it proved to be true. So one day I met with our pastor at Grace, and I told him that Angie and I were feeling a pull toward this new mission startup, and that we were feeling conflicted about it. Being on the finance committee at Grace, I knew we were among the largest donor families there. Grace was not a wealthy congregation. I was hoping that he would affirm how important we were to Grace Lutheran and dispel any notions of leaving. I will never forget Pastor Vern Broughton's response. Rob, that pull is the Holy Spirit tugging on you. You and Angie have to go. A few weeks later, Grace Lutheran held a sending service, and we and another couple were sent as evangelists on their behalf to this new congregation. Needless to say, amidst our tears, another huge brick was added to my faith foundation. So we found ourselves worshiping in a school gymnasium, setting up and tearing down chairs each Sunday morning. Above the music stand that Bruce used as a pulpit was a basketball hoop. Often there was a lingering aroma that only a gymnasium that has been closed up tight for a few days can have. We were leaders in the first, the second, and the third capital campaigns that ultimately built our church home. And Pastor Bruce and his wife Carol and their 2 kids became great family friends. One day, over one of the many lunches Bruce and I would have together, he asked me if I might have an interest in serving on the Augustana Board of Regents. Bruce was on Augustana's board then, and he knew of my interest in education and my passion for learning and teaching. But I was a bit confused and shocked by his question. Really? Why would Augustana want me? I was not connected to Augustana. Furthermore, at that time, I was serving in support of President Betty Asher on the executive board of the University of South Dakota Foundation, as well as on the USD Business School Advisory Board. Bruce persisted, and shortly thereafter, I was honored to be invited to become a member of Augustana's board. I served on Augie's board for 12 years, including 4 years on the executive committee and 2 years as board chair during Ralph Wagner's presidency. In my last year of eligibility to serve, I noted in the board materials that there was a vacancy in the Department of Business Administration for a professor of business management. It was at the same time exciting and frightening because I felt sure it was an opening for me to make a career change. I somewhat fearfully asked the academic dean, Dr. Dick Hansen, about the opening after our board meeting had adjourned. The very next day, President Bruce Halverson was in my office at the bank, and we talked seriously about how this might come to be. Here I need to back up a bit and tell you what was happening at the bank. My responsibilities had continued to grow, and I was now the Southern District President, overseeing our banks in southeastern South Dakota, southwest Minnesota, and one loan production office in Nebraska. I was responsible for leading hundreds of employees in 29 locations in 13 communities, and for billions of dollars in assets. My direct superior, the regional president, announced his pending retirement, and I was interested in taking that next step up the ladder in my career. This was a position that had been held by my mentors, people I had admired and respected. So rising within the organization to hold that same position would represent a level of accomplishment for me, because then I would occupy the same role as those people that I had admired. However, for the first time in my career, I was not chosen for a position that I had actively sought. Most people would have been very content to have my present job, but for me, not achieving that next promotion represented failure. I was devastated. My pride was dashed. Angie tried hard to offer support and consolation, but with little effect. But fortunately, when I finally was able to set my emotions aside and thoughtfully examine what had happened, I realized that I was so very lucky. What was transpiring at the bank also was that there was dissonance between my personal values and what was happening in the organization. I simply was not as happy as I used to be. And I deluded myself into imagining that that next promotion would provide that. The truth was, I was meant to be doing something else. And now I was free to pursue it. You see, that's when my eyes saw the opening at Augustana. Without the disruption in what I thought was my career plan, would I have seen it at all? Would I have even recognized it as something for me? So with the help of President Halverson and Dean Hansen, I came to Augustana to teach. I devoted myself to learning as much as I could. In the social science division, I found mentors who were willing to invest themselves in me and in my progress. I learned how much work and preparation went into becoming an effective teacher. I admired my colleagues and tried to become one of Augustana's great professors, but knew full well that I had a long way to go to become one. I found that I loved the classroom, just as I had earlier when I had dabbled in it part-time while I was in banking. But now this was my full-time passion, and I was having fun again. I took a 70% cut in salary. I never again made the salary, the income that I had at the bank. but I was so happy again. I caught the energy of the young people in the room with me and was both energized and exhausted after each day of classes. I enjoyed learning about Augustana from the ground level instead of the 40,000-foot viewpoint that trustees have. As a trustee, one tries to think that you understand the institution. But at 40,000 feet, I can assure you there are times when it is cloudy, and you can't quite see clearly what is happening on the ground. I also found that even on the ground, there are days when it is foggy, and one can't clearly see what's happening across the green in another department or building. In my second year of teaching, word came that President Halverson would be retiring and that Augustana would be searching for its next president. People came to me to assess my interest in the position, but I resisted. I had told them that I had been a president for 16 years and I knew what it took. I was nominated for the position, and the consultant called me several times, encouraging me to throw my hat in the ring. The search consultant was none other than my friend, the former USD President, Betty Asher, who called me again around 5:30 on the last day they would accept applications. We had a great conversation, and she encouraged me, and I agreed to submit my application materials. Now, in retrospect, I know that I should have first called Angie. But fortunately, she continued, as she always has for so many years, to be supportive. When the board chair called our home a few months later after the search process had played out, it was with great joy that I accepted the invitation to become Augustana's 23rd president. And the rest, as they say, is history. I have said many times that in life it is difficult to recognize the work of the Holy Spirit in our daily activities. If you are navigating your daily work in a manner that is in sync with your deeply held values, and the harmony of what we do and who we are allows us to imagine that it is us who are the authors of our story, of our successes. But when one looks back, it is so much clearer how the Holy Spirit has been at work at so many facets of my life. My father's faith and his gift of sharing and role modeling for me and for my siblings created that strong foundation for us. Most often, I didn't even realize that foundation was holding me up. The good fortune of meeting Angie and her family and their reliance on their faith traditions was something that I was drawn to, and it's what brought me back to the church. The impacts of my mentors, who offered guidance in both professional and personal aspects of my development and growth. My teachers, who ignited in me this passion for learning and the opportunities that came about for me to teach, perhaps preparing the way for my future role in education. My connection to my alma mater and to President Betty Asher. Our relationship to the church and the impact of pastors in our lives, particularly Pastor Bruce Williams, who brought me into relationship with Augustana. And now, of course, Pastor Paul and Ann, who serve us at Augustana, and my friend Bishop Dave. Augustana friends and mentors and special individuals like Presidents Wagner and Halverson and Dick Hansen. I realized that I never could have become Augustana's president had I not first spent time as a member of the faculty so that my colleagues might come to know and trust me. They might never have trusted this business guy without that time. So that failure at the bank, which felt so much like a punch to my gut, was really a wake-up call to tell me that it was time for change and to prepare me for my future. Challenges are like that. Sometimes it's pain that teaches us the most. And finally, the gift of this faith-filled learning community that is Augustana. For 28 years, I worked in an organization that had a great set of values that resonated with my own. But the 25 years that I have spent associated with Augustana particularly the last 13, where I have worked with the opportunity to worship 4 times a week with my colleagues and with our students, has been a wonderful gift to us. To hear my colleagues preach, to hear our students preach, is a gift. And we have the best music in any church in Sioux Falls, let me tell you. The Holy Spirit is active all around us, prodding us, encouraging us, holding us up in times of challenge. Sometimes the Spirit works through others in our lives, sometimes through the voice that comes from within. So often we don't acknowledge the constancy and faithfulness of God. But communities like Concordia and Augustana are places that celebrate that presence and encourage us all to recognize and honor God through our work. Is what we do to earn an income to support our families just work? Or is it just work? Is it possible for us to grapple with that question of what to do with our lives and come up with an answer that is in harmony with our innermost values? I believe that an answer lies in the prayer petition that we offered just a little over a week ago at the baccalaureate service for our newest Augustana graduates. Dear Lord, take me as I am. Summon out what I shall be. Set your seal upon my heart and live in me. Amen. Somewhere there's a switch.
Yeah.
There is a switch.
All right.
Why don't you sit right there? Side.
We'll have you sit in the middle, of
take
course.
the,
Thank you so much for your remarks. Before we delve into some questions, we'll give President Kraft a chance to respond a little bit. So,
Thank you,
Yep.
Larry. Rob, thank you for such an honest and searching talk about your life and your work, about the justice of that work, and about the ways in which we discover opportunities on our lives when perhaps we did not expect them to come. You know, I wasn't thinking of this when I prepared for... I don't know which of this.
might be me. Okay.
I wasn't thinking of this when I prepared for my small part here today, but Rob and I are almost exact contemporaries. We have more in common than that, however. My father was a navigator on a B-24 Liberator. My dad was the pilot. and became a liaison officer for the Air Force Academy after that.
How about that?
And I should tell you now, and tell everybody here, that my grandfather always advised me to become a banker. I failed to follow that advice, but I'm very honored to be here with you today. But we have other things in common beside that. Here in this place, in the early summer, one of the things that I'd like to say is that although private colleges across the United States, for reasons that everyone will understand, are always seeking to say what is distinctive about Augustana, what is distinctive about Concordia. And oftentimes, to be forthright, we're hiring the same marketing firms to help us determine what is uniquely distinctive about our place versus their place. And it's easy to forget that great and good colleges have things in common, should have things in common. And our colleges have in common a faith in the liberating love of God and a faith in the liberating character of learning. The speaker at Concordia College this year at commencement was a 2006 graduate whose name is Maquette Denis. I met Maquette in my first summer as president of Concordia College when she walked into my office. I learned that she had come to Concordia College from Haiti. Her family was, well, radically poor. Some of her siblings did not survive their childhood. She met, when she was a child, a pastor, a Lutheran pastor from Detroit Lakes in Minnesota, who helped her get to high school in Minnesota. And then she came to Concordia on a scholarship. She graduated with a nursing degree and then went back to Haiti. I was very moved by this story, and I asked her what had it meant to come to Concordia. And I can tell you even now that what I was certain she would say is that it meant that I was the first and only person in my family ever to go to school, let alone to go to college and graduate. But that's not what she said. What she said was that at Concordia, and she would have said this at Augustana, at Concordia I learned to dream bigger dreams. And what she meant was that she learned to dream dreams about not herself, but her neighbor. So what she did was to go back to Haiti and found a school. She founded a school and raised money for the school, and I realized that that was the real reason she had come to my office, was to do some advancement work. She was successful at that, I should say.
Good for her.
But my point is to affirm what you said at the very beginning about just work and the way in which our colleges can inspire students to dream bigger dreams, dreams beyond themselves for the love and service of the world. And in fact, I'm going to start off the questioning with a question. You and I went to college about the same time in the early 70s, and I think about those days, and they seem in some ways similar, but in other ways very, very different from the world that our students are part of now. So I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, in your experience, what is different? What is different about the lives of those students now? What is different about the challenges that they face? And what ought to be different about the ways that we, seeking to do just work, try to sustain them?
Almost everything. I think about the communication channels that young people have today and the way they have learned through their upbringing to communicate is so different than our experience. And I also, I'm cognizant of the fact that I had many more opportunities to fail and to learn from those failures in a much safer environment because everything wasn't on the internet. And all the mistakes that I made weren't captured forever. So that when somebody Googled my name, there it was. I'm really grateful for that. and I won't go any further. But let me just say that I have dealt with young people who have had that heartbreak of experiences that were learning teachable moments in their lives. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, what is this doing for my future? And so one of the things we have to do is really help them to understand that technology is their great friend, but it is also a really sharp tool that can cut them at times. And they have to be careful with that. And they have to be really cognizant about what they're putting out there. And at that age, who's cognizant of that? I wasn't. So we need to help them do that. So I think a lot of the technology has made wonderful advances. Remember the computers we worked with?
Yes.
And it's wonderful, but at the same time, there's an edge to that cuts both ways.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, thank you so much for your remarks, Rob, and I was particularly struck by, your connection and the humility of recognizing in yourself that sense of the Holy Spirit working and calling. One of my favorite quotes about liberal arts education is from the Chicago theologian Joseph Sittler, who said our job in the liberal arts is to complicate lives open. Mm-hmm. And I see that in our own personal calling too, where you were, your own life complicated things in ways that you didn't expect that allowed the Holy Spirit to work. So I think about that, and I wonder about the kinds of healthy tensions that we are able to create in institutions like Augustana and Concordia. Have you thought about, or either of you can respond to this, but what are some of those healthy tensions that probably we want to maintain?
I think first of all, tension is obviously true in our faith. We are both saint and sinner. Mm-hmm. And there's tension in all of that. And tension in our lives. And I think as at institutions like ours, one of the things that we can do is to help give young people tools to grapple with the tensions that they will face in their future. And it's those values that we espouse and that we try to live out and we try to help them understand more fully, and that those are tools that will help them navigate their future ambiguities that they have to navigate. And when they find themselves in a really difficult and challenging moment, my hope is that there's some values there that will rise up, and that some of those values were cemented in place at places like Augustana and Concordia, because then they'll have those tools. And I see it in our graduates. I see it in the work that they do. And they affirm that. I think, as you and I go out and meet with our alumni, they affirm that for us all the time. They affirm that the things they learned, and both the technical things that they might have learned in a class, but moreover, the values that they learned at our places, allows them to navigate some of the tensions that they will face when answers aren't clear.
We'd like to open up to questions from the audience, and Faith is in the back room with a microphone, so if you have a question, we have one right over here. If you want to wait for the mic, it'll be easier for
Joyce
people
always
to
asks
hear.
really hard questions, so I gotta be careful about Joyce.
First, I thank you too, Rob, and for this opportunity to be here today. And as a longtime educator, one of my greatest concerns was, first, just briefly, that moonwalk that happened. I was sitting in my living room and heard Walter Cronkite talk about this fellow whose pulse was so, and his blood pressure. I think that revolutionized my thinking. If we are preparing people for the future, in my case it was nursing, how is technology going to affect this? Here was a profession that had possibilities far beyond what we could see, if this was possible, and it was. So I'm asking, I guess, as you look toward that future and all the things that have happened, what do you see as probably one of our great challenges for the future of higher education?
I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is having the right dreams out there. I mean, really putting out there the right aspirations. You mentioned the moon. Because of my dad's work, much of which I had no clue until I was well into my adulthood, and I was reading books, Thomas Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, and Yeager's book, and Failure is Not an Option, books about the space program. It's when I realized that, oh my gosh, my dad was doing it. I was calling Dad saying, hey, did you, oh yeah, it was about, well, why didn't you? Well, I couldn't talk about it, and he wouldn't anyway, because he's so doggone humble about those things. But anyway, you think about the power of a dream to put a man on the moon. And when you read those books and you read the tales of those, I mean, these are engineers who had no idea how to do this. They had no idea. But they had a dream. And they began to work together, and they began to collaborate together, and they began to really pour their energy into finding what were first really small answers that then added up to big answers and allowed big things to happen. And so what are the dreams that are out there now? I mean, do we really, as a society, are we putting the right dreams out there for people? I worry about that right now. I worry that we don't have the right dreams out there because I believe in the power of technology, because technology has really given us that ability now more than ever to collaborate. I mean, think about those engineers, they all came together. One of the reasons we move so often is because the engineers moved wherever the money was. So, you know, when the federal government would issue the contracts, then all the engineers would go to North American Aviation in California, where we lived, and then they'd move to Honeywell down in Florida, where we lived, and then they moved to Rockwell in St. Louis, and so, but they all had to be in the same proximity, and they all had to be together using these massive computers that filled a whole room that could hardly do anything. And now today, if you look at the technology we have available to us, we can collaborate all around the world with people, with thoughtful people who really want to solve human problems and better the lives of your neighbor. And how do we go about doing that if we don't have the right dreams? Or if we stifle dreams by putting boundaries in places and say, I'm sorry, my border doesn't cross your border. And how do we do that? How do we do that together? So technology is an answer.
President Kraft, would you care to respond to that question?
I think I can build on, Rob, on what you said when you raised this question of what are the concerns. I would agree with Rob that technology is an incredible tool and far more wide-ranging. So this afternoon, being here, I'm missing a conversation in Fargo between the tri-colleges there and Sanford Health, which is about the possibility of a shared sim lab for nursing. This was inconceivable, you know, when I was in college. And so there's access and there is the capacity to envision things that is really remarkable and in many ways very stirring and very moving. My concern is that technology also has the ability to sort of disaggregate things. That is to say, if a college education is an accumulation of credits, you can get credits anywhere. If you have a credit card, you can get credits. You can get credits without leaving your home. You can pick up credits here and there. And what's lost there is something that I think Rob was alluding to over and over again, which is the idea of community. That we have responsibility to one another. And so I think that our alliances are going to become more and more important. The dreams that you speak about, they're going to arise because there is a community of memory, there's a community of faith, there's a community of commitment. And so actually, you know, the kind of thing that we're doing today, I think we need to do more often to affirm those shared values and commitments to create the kind of community that will sustain the dreams that Rob was talking about. I know there's a question.
Well, I asked for the microphone, and then you made my point.
We work together. So.
It happens.
I think I've spent my entire 46-year career on the leading, sometimes the bleeding edge of technology.
Yes, you have.
And when I started as a broadcaster, the hot new thing back then was something called FM radio. Technology moves, always has, always will. It's what we do. We create new ways of doing things, new mechanisms, new tools, if you please. But the difference isn't necessarily the tools, even though it always garners the headlines. What really matters is what people do with the tools. And that orientation has to come from somewhere. It comes from the culture that may develop from their own, you know, sociology coming from their family on through their friends, who they choose for their friends, where they choose to go. And I just offer a commendation to both of you as presidents of fine institutions, liberal arts colleges that concentrate a little bit on that orientation, making sure that, you know, the commitment from the individual comes first with all that, providing them the tools and maybe the right way to use those tools to accomplish a common good. Yeah. So thank you for that. And thanks again for making that point.
Yeah. I think the liberal arts plays such a huge role in that too, because you're really trying to educate a broad-thinking human being who is able to really understand the interconnectedness of all disciplines, and that we can't just look through one single lens. I think about our time in education when we were in college in the 70s. It was really a time when we were going deeply into analytical activity. I mean, we were really trying to break things down to the most minute particle. And we've continued on that drive. But I think one of the things that's lost in that, if that's the sole pursuit, is analysis, and further analytical work, we forget the synthesis. We forget of putting it all back together. We forget about drawing different pieces together to create a complex solution to what is a complex problem. And that's, I think, what liberal arts graduates are certainly more aware of. They have a broader perspective. And they have I hope that we have taught them to listen more carefully to others. Because that's when you can draw together really disparate ideas to put together and synthesize a solution.
Unfortunately, it's our practice to try to stay true to our time commitments here, and so
I talk
we're
too much.
we're bumping up against, and I want to have a chance for John to offer a closing here, but I know that a number of us will be hanging around shortly afterwards, too, to try to catch us if you have some other additional comments personally to make. This time I'd like to invite John up, talking about perfect example of cross-pollination. John is, of course, a well-known Sioux Falls business person and community supporter, has served on both of our boards of regents. And I just wanted to ask you, John, before you give your closing comments, I quoted Isaiah earlier. Do you know how many chapters are in the book of Isaiah?
66.
Yeah, okay.
I was given the opportunity for my 50th class reunion to present our gift to the college, and it was really fun to do our gift for that year, but our cumulative gift from our class was $32 million, and that was pretty fun to do up in
And 66
Concordia.
cents. Right?
And 66 cents. We did end with a 66, but it was a great event. I started on the board at Augustana with Rob Oliver. Served 11 years with him in that capacity, and then a couple of years after that, spent 12 years on the board at Concordia College. And so, as Rob said, from that 40,000-foot vantage point, I can tell you that we are blessed with two awfully wonderful colleges of the church, places of faith and learning, where I can't imagine the depth of reach that has come from these two schools into hospitals and schools and businesses across the country and across the world. It's just an awesome power that has been unleashed and flows in and through the lives of just countless numbers of people because of Augustana College and Concordia College. And I would just conclude by saying, through that and with the people in this room, we have all been blessed to be a blessing. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks
Thanks
be to
be to
God.
God. Thank you so much.
Thank you.